and brought me to this land when I was about 1 year old. And I'm the director of the School of Interactive Arts and Technology here at SFU, and my office is just across the hall. So as we begin, I would like to acknowledge that here at both CIT and in SFU, that we breathe, hold, think, see, create, and witness the lives and work that continues on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Kwantlen, and Coquitlam, Kaikwat-Swasan, and numerous Stolo nations. And for all of us coming together at this moment in time, and here in this place and on these lands, I acknowledge and give great thanks for these lands that have been here since time immemorial. And I am grateful for the gift of sharing our presence together on these lands today, tomorrow, and the next day. So thank you so much. And also, I would like to introduce to you Elder Kevin Kelly, who is going to be doing the host nation welcome. Thank you so much.
Well, really want to thank you, Sara, for the call. So a lot of this work we carry out, whether you're SFU, whether you're where I live in Fort Langley, about half an hour away. This is still my wife's territory. Their land goes from where I reside in Fort Langley all the way to Richmond. All Kwantlen Polytech universities are all in Kwantlen territory, Langley, Surrey, Richmond. My wife's traditional name is Dakwasan. Her English name is Hereditary Chief Marilyn Gabriel, the land you are on. My wife has been chief of her community 35 years. She is a hereditary chief. And how that ended up was I married a hereditary chief. I'm still a member of my tribe up in Cultus Lake, Sheelagh. My Indian name is Ploessl. I carry my late father's name from my territory. So when you have a traditional name, one of our names, they usually call you by your traditional name because it tells the people where you come from. My name means close to the water, close to the valley. So you'd know I was from the Sheelagh area. I'm honored to be here. I thank you for the call. I thank you for your kind words. I thank each and every one of you for being here. For one, a safe trip getting here. But on our ways, when we sing these songs, it's not a performance and it's not a show. This is our way of prayer. Our elders tell us every time we sing one of these songs, today, maybe when you woke up, you didn't feel very good in your heart. Maybe when you left home, somebody in your household wasn't feeling well. Or maybe there's somebody in your family that's in a hospital. Or maybe you just laid a loved one to rest. Our elders tell us when we sing this song, you pray for yourself in here. I guarantee if you believe in our songs and respect our songs are medicine for everybody. I've witnessed numerous times when we do a song, and I always tell the people, an elder once said in Vancouver, where my wife and son were, somebody started crying. And the elder looked and they were trying to hold it back, and he just said, your tears are welcome here. And we always say that because sometimes we don't know what you're carrying. Sometimes we're going 100 miles an hour, right? And I used to like these conferences because it slows you down too. You see old friends, but you also meet new friends. I just met this young lady from Scotland. And this is what this does. We can all work together like you are doing. If we stick together and work together, we can only make it better. And I hope you have a good week here on why you're here. But when you go back to where you come from, you share with your peers and colleagues what you witnessed. In our ways, how you have laptops and that. Our elders tell us we were the recorder. We did it orally. And how you're looking at me, why I look back, is I give you the respect back that you give me. That's the way I play. In our ways, we record with our eyes, our ears, and our heart. And at the end, maybe somebody might ask you to respond on how you felt about what you learned this week. And this is how we do it. I just wanted to thank you, Sara, for the call. And I told her, always feel free to call me because I do a lot of work at SFU. And they really respect the Kwantlen territory. I was telling that girl from Scotland to check out the artwork. These are 4 nations that did the work here and in the medical school. You can take that home with you. I'm going to do a welcome song. I know you're busy, but have a beautiful day. But most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see him.
I am now going to introduce somebody who I'm sure you know quite well at this juncture in time, the wonderful and the amazing Sara Diamond, an amazing human being with a really lovely name. Not even a diamond in the rough anymore. As you know, Sara is I guess the seed that started the conference, but also the passion and the energy that has grown that seed to be what it is now, and that has called you all here. So I just want to say thanks to Sara for your amazing work in Crossing Fonds, and Sara is going to begin the rest of the day. So thank you, Sara.
I think I'll stand here and see if the audio is going to work from here. Does that work okay? Yeah? Hello, 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 hello. I guess it doesn't. Okay, we'll do that. So thank you so much, Elder Kevin Kelly, for your words of wisdom. And thank you, Tekla Shiphorst, for your land acknowledgement and your support and just your warmth. It's wonderful to be here. So as Tekla mentioned, I'm Dr. Sara Diamond, and I'm the principal investigator of the Crossing Fonds larger project and of the symposium. And I send my warmest greetings to all of you in the room, and thank you for being here. And to all of you out there in the cloud, I always look up, but it's actually a bunch of servers somewhere. So I want to thank the steering committee of this symposium. They've worked incredibly hard to bring this into being. Dr. Andrea Fatona, OCAD University, Melanie Hardbattle, where are you? Thank you. From SFU Archives, Karen Knights, VIVO Media Art, yay. And Sheelagh Carpendale, SFU Computer Science, and of course the unbelievable Sydney Lines, who is still standing, which is amazing. And she's from UBC, finishing her doctoral degree there, and an amazing conference coordinator. So the conference was funded, I think it's important to acknowledge how this came into being, by OCAD University's Office of Research, the Visual Analytics Lab that I lead, and the Center for the Study of the Black Canadian Diaspora that Andrea leads. Also from SFU, the Faculty of Communications, Art and Technology, and SciAT, who is, as Tekla said, surrounding us, warmly embracing us. The Office of the Provost of SFU, the SFU Archives, and its Library and Rare Books collection. Also, the Internet Archives. Thank you very much for being here and giving us funding. VIVO Media Arts, Black, the Black Arts Center, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and the arts events at VIVO are supported by the Canada Council for the Arts and BC Arts Council. And our fabulous partners also include the City of Vancouver Archives and the BC Labour Heritage Centre. So quite a roll of characters. There's several goals of the 3 days to come that include the workshops and presentations yesterday. Over the next days, the Crossing Fonds Digital Archive Symposium will share 2 years of collaborative efforts that have focused on the creation of an Omeka-S platform or ecosystem, as we like to describe it, that is meant to enable collaborative research, creation, curation, and sharing between archives. We're going to present a series of case studies. We started with one last night that the platform has enabled that explore labor, Black, and Indigenous histories. Equally, we'll explore the broad field of critical archival studies, looking and sensing reflectively in the context of the history and contemporary and future role of digital archives, with the goal of creating cultures of care, ones that respect and engage Indigenous principles of OCAD, so ownership, control, access, and possession of data and knowledge, and deep collaboration with the histories of marginalized communities. Today, we're going to focus on emerging technologies that support a collaborative digital archive, as well as artist reflections on the archives at VIVO. And I really encourage people to come to the program tonight. I think it'll be so exciting. Tomorrow, we'll look at critical archival studies in the digital context, and then Sunday on cross-pollination between media and practices, looking to the future of Crossing Fonds and parallel kinds of projects. So please join us on the Crossing Fonds Omeka-S platform. It's very easy to find from our website, and explore the platform and the case studies, and play, please. We would love your comments, your suggestions for metadata, to really dig in and tell us what works and what doesn't. There's a usability form that was sanctified by research ethics. And if you're interested in providing feedback, we'd love you to use it. And it's both on the Crossing Fonds and the Omeka website. So there's a few practical things to share. There are washrooms everywhere, it turns out. It's so exciting. So there's one down this way, although you have to then find your way back. There's a chemistry lab. There's all outside. It's very exciting down there. Anyhow, so a robotics lab, but there's bathrooms down there, and there's washrooms apparently to your left and then in 2 directions. So feel free to pee. The other things are we have on-site RAs, research assistants, who can help you with wayfinding. So Jordan, Claire, and Mia are here, and there's a registration desk, and they're also sticking their heads around the corner. We have a green room. I don't know if it's literally green, but it is a green room in 2710 for presenters that you can use behind the symposium room to check your presentations and relax. And we have 15-minute breaks between sessions. Hopefully we'll keep this on time. There's a catered breakfast, there's catered lunch every day, and food and refreshments at the evening event. So our philosophy was eat, please eat. And it'll help you either stay awake, or if you need a nap, it'll help you with that as well. The event is live streamed, and some sessions will be recorded. And if anybody left their Mac charger plugged into the wall during the workshop session yesterday, oh, secours, come and see Sydney. She has it, and she'd like to give it back to you. She doesn't need another one. So that's it. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. And I'd like the first panel. I think we're a little bit early. So welcome to the first panel. This panel is going to give you an overview of the Crossing Fonds project. And we have speakers who are actually going to self-introduce. So we're going to start with me, and then Paul Hebbard, and then Karen Knights, and then Sheelagh Carpendale, and then Kahani Ploessl. And we're going to make sure that we try and leave some time for Q&A, even though we're running a few minutes late. And we're going to go back and forth between your questions and comments and those who are online. So I'm not going to introduce myself. You by now know who I am. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of origins of the Crossing Fonds project. So it's a 2-year, and its full name, which is sort of important because of the concept, is the Crossing Fonds Pollinating Access and Interpretation. And we actually worked very hard, Karen, didn't we, to use a kind of excavating type terminology in the entire grant. So we really tried to use terms that were not about, exploring, excavating, et cetera, but we're very much about pollinating and seeding and kind of agricultural metaphors, I guess. So it's a 2-year social science and humanities research grant that is a coalition between the OCAD University, SFU Archives, SFU Library of Rare Books and Special Collections, the City of Vancouver Archives, and VIVO the Black Arts Center, and the BC Labour Heritage Center. So it was motivated by the realization that it was significantly challenging to effectively collaborate with different archival records from different institutions. And its sort of baby inception was partly because my own fonds are distributed between SFU Archives, VIVO, and the Royal British Columbia Museum and Archives. So it was like a kind of even a pragmatic, like, how do we work with those funds? And then typically it grew. We thought that wasn't very interesting. What was really interesting was this opportunity to create a space where you could pull in archival material from different fonds that were each relevant to the other, but do that in a proper archival research way where you could access the metadata and comment on it. So our coalition, and really has been a coalition, has worked to build relationships between diverse archives, seeing these as sites of research and knowledge production and access by building relationships and deep collaborations across very different kinds of archival and not-for-profit organizations, in part to foster sustainability in the sector and ease of public access. And I think really knowledge sharing about what it is to go digital in the context of archives, which is no small matter. And it was so interesting at the workshop yesterday, at Andrea's workshop, just to hear the kind of different levels of preparedness and readiness and capability to work in the digital space across archives that were part of that workshop. So that'll be a theme as we go forward for sure. Community encounter archives, I think we know this, and there's a lot of great literature about it, have grown in response to exclusion and misrepresentation by mainstream institutions. But at the same time, archivists within those institutions have also engaged with the need to reframe relationships with communities and with either knowledge holders historically, or with communities whose archives are within those institutions. And the same is true for libraries that play an archival role. And I'm not talking about museums and galleries, but this is about the GLAM sector in so many ways, right? This conversation, but we're more focused on archives and collecting libraries here over the next days. Our goals have been to pollinate collaborative access amongst these different kinds of archives by designing a replicable open source digital archive Omeka-S ecosystem or platform. I bow down to Kahani, and you will hear from her shortly. And also a big shout out to the Digital Humanities lab here at SFU, who's been a phenomenal partner, that allows interaction and facilitates individual and collaborative study, creation, and critique. Such Crossing Fonds enables access to expert and non-expert users across institutional boundaries. So we really wanted to create something different. And you'll hear a bit from Sheelagh today about, the kind of limitations of using an existing open source software, but we came to that, and you'll hear about why from Kahani after quite a lot of deliberation. So Crossing Fonds is motivated by the opportunities that, as many authors have suggested, are amplified by digital access and equally by the urgent desire by communities and individuals to find and reclaim the histories that can ground them in the present and help frame the future, and to seek and create archival resources. So relevant fonds can be segregated between institutions, and it can be very frustrating for researchers and very frustrating for community users. There are few platforms, even within a single archive, that allow rich exploration and curation of item sets in relation to each other. So like we've crossed archives, but you know, some of this is certainly can be said about existing archives and how to think about pulling complicated collections together within them. But the digital forum also offers the possibilities for dynamic interaction and interventions that refresh metadata and description. And that idea I'll come back to, and it's been very important. And Ploessl has said, and I really like this idea, that while appearing to be disembodied, archives contain lived experiences of actual bodies and interfaces that need to be understood as dynamic and lively, and where the body is engaged as well as the mind. So in the last 2 years, we've provided a set of tools and workshops that encourage that challenge, that is of the traditional notion of archival neutrality and unquestioned metadata, particularly as it appears to records created by or about Indigenous and other marginalized groups, through community annotation and reuse of content, supporting critical assessment of participating archives collections. So part of what we did in thinking about the grant, and this has been true about VIVO, which is, you know, an alternate archive. You know, there's material in that archive that VIVO is, and I know you're going to talk about that. I don't want to usurp this, but, you know, is really rethinking in terms of its metadata, its description, you know, who collected, who made that video, who collected, including my own archives, that really needs critical commentary as we really try to confront some of the issues around Indigenous reconciliation and relationships with other marginalized communities, historically marginalized, equity-deserving communities. So we've really tried to create also multi-institutional thematic guides, and there is one for Andrea Fatona's project and for our projects that link digital content across archives, including access permissions for working across these archives and copyright information. A goal of the project has been to stimulate dialogue regarding the need to retain the authenticity of records, yet encourage curatorial and community interpretation, particularly again, as these apply to records created by and about marginalized groups. So that is, and I know I'm singing to the choir, but this is such an important and difficult practice, right? To look at provenance, to look at, you know, how things were historically described, how they entered a collection, and how one redescribes, and yet trying to retain that historical thread, because we need to understand the history of colonization and not pretend it didn't happen, for example, by rewriting or removing or making things disappear that are part of that history. To the composition of the research team and its methods, this project has also sought to address Call 70 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which requires the inclusion of Indigenous record keepers and researchers, their perspectives and methodology within the Canadian archival system. The Crossing Fonds project engaged two approaches that allowed close readings of specific histories and archives, and understanding of patterns that can be generalized, and balanced institutional critique with collaborative problem solving. These are critical archival studies, and you've heard a bit about that, and participatory design. So much attention has been given to the ways that systems of power are embedded in archives. You know, these theorizations see archives as agents of power and control. But critical archival studies takes a very different stance. It seeks to develop inclusive, accessible, and multivocal sites for cultural participation and dissemination. I mean, one of the things that Andrea said yesterday, which was very interesting and came out of the conversation in her workshop, was taking the archives out. It's not just bringing communities in, it's taking the archives out. So this idea of sort of multivocality and different sites. And of course, seeing these associated with an ethics of care and commitment to expand representation, involve donors and community members in description and exhibition of their archival materials, some of which you will see tomorrow night at Black, in fact, and to shape the ways their records are discovered and understood. So the work occurs within a close reading of the history of specific archives and fonds within the context of nation states and global patterns such as migration, through structural analysis of collections, through collecting practices and gaps, and when appropriate, using visualization, as well as attention to and through linguistic analysis of metadata. So interventions include rethinking attribution and provenance, metadata and description modification workshops, which we have done a number of, and refinements, including at the item level, and subject heading modification. Associated with these analytic tools is the concept of care, which argues for the need to protect Indigenous rights and interests in Indigenous data, including traditional knowledges, balancing these rights in relation to open data and the growing use of machine learning. And I quote Carol here, Indigenous data must facilitate collective benefit for Indigenous peoples to achieve inclusive development and innovation, improve governance and citizen engagement, and realize equitable outcomes. And we have quite a few speakers over the next few days who will be addressing both case studies and these overall practices. The second is participatory design, which I'm constantly reminding people who've been involved in what I call the California project, that is the sort of West Coast IDO, design thinking. Participatory design did not start there. It emerged from late 20th century labor activism in Northern Europe and combined ethnography and design to support workers' inclusion in designing technological change. Sanders notes that in participatory experiences, the roles of the designer and the researcher blur, and the user becomes a critical component of the process. And the goal of the design process then is the design, which can be iterated, but equally mutual learning. So participatory design theory is invested in equitable engagement and coincides with Sub Harwell's concept of socialized digital curation, which converges digital and social curation to link archives, curators, communities, and technologies to collectively respond to fonts and their content, in part by creating new technologies. And I quote Robertson and Simonson, who say, quote, participatory design is driven by a consistent socio-technological approach that appreciates the content in which the technology will be used and the processes and practices within that context. So, unquote, it's hence necessary to understand not only the available tool set for open source archival development, which we certainly did, but also appreciate the culture of use, discourse, technology, context, and best practice examples to set goals for participatory design processes, some of which Sheelagh and Kahani will be speaking to. So our project methodology has also included iterative participatory design, so a series of workshops that created the specifications for the ecosystem, driven by a set of personas that represented ideal users. Secondly, participatory cataloging practices, which we again experienced in the workshop that Andrea led yesterday and will come up again over the next 3 days, including strategies such as co-creation of new subject taxonomies and classifications for describing the works of Black cultural producers, relationships that leave traces across multiple fonts and repositories, and research creation. So knowledge building through the scholarly practices of exploration, discovery, application, integration, and dissemination, exemplified through Dana Claxton's new video work premiering tonight at VIVO. Woohoo! And we've also, and also her panel performance. I don't want to be a spoiler, but her panel performance tomorrow, which you will see, which embodies this practice. And also through presentations over the next days, a number of the folks who are presenting are people who are very engaged with research creation practices. And fourth, visualization, while nascent on the Crossing Fonds platform and quite constrained by, excuse me, Omega S, the opportunity for visualization will play a larger role over the course of the next days. And finally, case studies. these have been at the core of the project alongside building the platform. So our case studies, basically, we've worked for 12 to 16 months with a focused set of records. The microsites are kind of, which you will see, are test cases and prototypes. These can be compared, contrasted, and patterns identified and analyzed against the larger kind of socioeconomic, environmental, and cultural trends and data, which are embodied within the records and the case studies. So in starting this project, I reached out to 3 individuals whose practices had coincided with mine literally decades ago in Vancouver. So Karen Knights, my curatorial partner, Dana Claxton, who I've known since we were both really young, a collaborator in activist documentary work, fellow travelers in the punk scene, a partner in work I undertook at the Banff Center, and Dr. Andrea Fatona, whose work and mine coincided in the 1980s and early 90s. Given that our own histories are referenced quite heavily over the next days and last night, Claxton, Diamond, Fatona, and Knights have been trying to engage with self-reflective positionality in relationship to our fawns. So, the case studies have very radically different forms, from Karen and my reassessment of components of the large-scale labor history archives, Andrea's, Dana's engagement with the Indigenous Media Arts Group and Image Native or Aboriginal Film and Video Festival, and an experimental cross-generational research creation work, and Andrea's curation and exploration of personal archives of Black work and cultural production in the Greater Vancouver area. So the project has been an opportunity to re-engage with these historical records, some of which were contemporaneous with our younger selves, as well as the historical records in relation to these in other archives. So that is the frame, and Paul, I pass it to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Hebbard. I'm the University Archivist here at SFU and a partner in the Crossing Fonds project. So I thought I would begin by talking a little bit about SFU Archives' involvement in Crossing Fonds. As Sara mentioned, she first approached me as SFU's University Archivist. I think it was just before the pandemic, actually, to gauge our interest in participating in a project that, as you said, was considerably narrower in scope than what Crossing Fonds actually evolved into. So we do hold, as Sara said, a small portion of our archives, primarily a collection of women's labor history interviews that she conducted when she was a graduate student at SFU. And in those early days of discussing what our participation in Sara's proposed project might look like, there was talk of digitizing her analog recordings and exploring how her fond could be accessed, studied, and creatively repurposed using open source technologies. Then along comes the pandemic, putting a hold on everyone's travel plans. And I think it was about 1.5 years later when Sara kind of circled back to revisit our interest again in participating. And when she did, the scope of the project had grown to include representation from diverse communities in the Lower Mainland, including Black and Indigenous representation. The project also included a broader collaboration between different types of archival repositories, including arts-based, community-based, municipal-based archives, along with SFU as a university-sponsored repository. So as University Archivist here at SFU, I was sort of intrigued by Sara's proposal for several reasons. One, we do have a research mission at the archives, and this was an opportunity for the archivists on staff to work collaboratively together on a project that was of interest to all of us as we continually inch away from the analog and towards the digital. But we are also primarily archival practitioners as opposed to research faculty, and as a department, we've actually invested a lot of resources over the past 13 years in building a digital preservation and access program. And our work in this regard has been guided by 5 principles, which are captured in our digital preservation management policy. And those are: 1, we're committed to preserving and providing access to the digital records in our holdings through the ongoing development and evolution of a robust and comprehensive digital preservation system. We try to foster a culture of adaptability as digital preservation technologies evolve. We contribute to developing community standards and best practices in digital preservation. We seek to form collaborative partnerships with other SFU departments as well as external organizations to leverage resources and avoid duplication of effort. And we try to demonstrate leadership in the digital preservation field by using open source software, contributing to standards creation, participating in scholarly and practical discussion, and developing tools and technologies. So our participating in Crossing Fonds aligns obviously strongly with these principles, which we first articulated back in 2017. Richard Dance, who's here, played a big role in drafting that policy. So our participation from that point of view was really a no-brainer. To date, most of our digital initiatives at SFU have been geared towards digital preservation with less practical emphasis on the deployment and use of digital humanities open source tools. And we felt that by participating in Crossing Fonds, we'd essentially get some hands-on experience with these tools, always with an eye to how we can better serve our own researcher clientele and broaden our own digital access and delivery services. So the Crossing Fonds ecosystem, Sarah's mentioned, we call it an ecosystem, is comprised of a variety of different agents or points of view. There are researchers who want to access and use archival digital collections. There are communities who are documented in the digital collections and who may want to have a more active voice in how those collections are curated or presented to the public. And then there are professional archivists and archival repositories that preserve and make accessible these collections. In Crossing Fonds, SFU Archives obviously falls within this latter group, but we have a vested interest in addressing the needs and concerns of researchers and the communities we document because collectively these groups make up our clientele. And we are a service-driven profession, and our success is really dependent upon how well we meet the informational needs of our users. So those were sort of our primary drivers for participating in the Crossing Fonds project. We are interested in better understanding the digital humanities needs of our researchers and in finding new and innovative ways of collaborating and communicating with the communities we document, all in the service of better realizing our archival mission and mandate. So keeping in mind that we approach this work from the point of view of archival practitioners working in institutional archives, I wanted to spend just a few moments on some of the questions that I've been pondering as a result of our participation in Crossing Fonds to date. So over the last 10 years or so, we've seen an incremental demand or expectation that our collections, be they analog or digital, can be accessed, if not online, then remotely in some form or fashion. So prior to the pandemic, 60% of our reference interactions with researchers were done through email. And while I don't have the stats to back that up, I think anecdotally, I'd say that percentage has only increased as a result of the pandemic. Researchers are just less and less inclined to darken our doorstep anymore. So our dealings with researchers are more and more virtual as opposed to in person. And twin with that trend is, of course, an expectation that our collections, which are still overwhelmingly analog, can be made accessible to researchers in digital form. So increasingly, we provide access to materials not in a reading room setting, but instead deliver digital objects to a remote researcher. I can't even recall the last time we actually made photocopies of records for a researcher, but we do constantly digitize case files, diaries, audio recordings, and films to satisfy the access needs of our remote clientele, be they on the other side of the campus or on the other side of the world. So these inextricable trends towards the digital make the work of Crossing Fonds relevant to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. I think what's less clear to me is the nature of the demand to service what I'm going to call the digital humanities needs of our clientele. So we know the clientele we serve want the stuff in our holdings in digital form, but we actually have very little experience with what they do with those digital objects once they're delivered up. And quite frankly, we have rarely been approached for assistance in helping our clientele creatively analyze or repurpose archival digital objects. Occasionally, we become aware of the completion of some final product through ongoing connections with our researchers. So I can think of YouTube videos documenting student protest movements at SFU, a CBC radio program about the fight to legalize abortion in Canada, and various local and international art installations that drew on our collections. But for the most part, we're sort of blind to the research outputs of our clientele. One of the early exercises we performed in Crossing Fonds, Sara has referred to this, was developing researcher personas, which were composites of different types of researchers with differing needs, both informational and technological. In doing so, we simply drew on our many years of experience staffing a reference desk. So describing the demographics of our clientele was easy because we actually track minimal demographic data about our users. And similarly, inventing examples of the collections used and the queries made of our holdings was not difficult or forced because we had concrete experiences to draw upon. But articulating scenarios in which a researcher has some digital humanities need, be it data visualization or transcription or image manipulation, was actually really hard because we do not, again, have a lot of practical insight into what our clientele do with the records. So why is that? Is it because our users don't think of us as the go-to experts in assisting them in their digital humanities needs? Is it because they simply do not need help and can do the work themselves? Or is it because the demand doesn't exist and the types of curation and digital humanities tools that we're trying to build in Crossing Fonds are actually addressing a niche interest or demand? And I don't know the answer to that question. From my point of view, I'm really happy to sort of build it, see if they will come. But whether the demand is there, I think is still a bit of an open question for me. The other big picture issue that requires, I think, more work is understanding how an existing application like Omeka S, which is an open source web publishing platform for the display of archival and scholarly collections, can be successfully modified to realize the vision of Crossing Fonds. We've made a lot of progress, and I think that's a question that's very much at the core of the project. We think of Crossing Fonds, again, as an ecosystem in which researchers can pull together digital collections, creatively repurpose digital objects, or build connections across Fonds, and then present the results of their work to the world. Now, Omeka, as it is currently configured, does that well. But we also want to facilitate a dynamic dialogue with the communities documented in the records who may want to comment on their meaning and use. So we also want the technology to facilitate a dialogue between researchers and communities. This requires the platform to realize bidirectional interactions and not just a unidirectional display of digital objects. And we also want to throw into that, throw into that mix archivists as a third agent, maybe working somewhere in the background, populating the platforms and providing maybe technical, administrative, and even financial resources. So this is an ecosystem comprised of complex interactions among differing agents with differing interests. We ran a great workshop in early March, and it was repeated yesterday, which brought together archivists, researchers, and community members documented in the digital collections and ran some interactive exercises to better understand the needs and expectations of all involved. That was a great start, but I still think it's early stages. One of the outputs I'd love to see is data modeling that better captures the complex interactions between these three groups that could then be used to inform the modification of the platform and identify potential technology gaps. We're trying to modify a platform that is currently designed to curate and display collections with little, if any, recursive feedback. It's more presentation software than interactive software, creating interconnections with and soliciting feedback from allied researchers who may have an interest in the collections, as well as the communities documented in the collections. I think it's much less realized at this point, and obviously a more complex system to develop and deploy. So that's where there's still considerable room, I think, for further work, and I think is where we really want to take the work. At SFU, we would very much like to adopt Omeka as a way of better pushing out our own digital collections to our clientele, and that's work we will be taking on, hopefully, in the near future. So just circling back to the drivers behind our participation, we've gotten our hands dirty, so to speak, with what for us are new open source tools. Now it's really up to us to deploy them and make them of value to our clientele. I think there are questions around the resourcing of such tools and their long-term sustainability. These are kind of old stories, always a concern. Our work has also highlighted the need for dedicated personnel with technical skills, not only to deploy the tools, but to modify them. And we've had some great help on this project. But when I think of our own staff, I think these skill sets we don't really have, like we've had to bring in outside support for that. And again, we need more feedback on whether the demand is actually there for us to continue to invest the time and the necessary resources to offer up these tools. So it's a promising beginning. There's still lots of work to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. That's great. Karen Knight,
I'll see if I can get this working.
I know you can,
You think
but
so?
there's help if you need it.
Just gonna settle. All right, so I'm speaking to you today from a very different place as a cultural worker who's deeply invested in the future of artist-run center archives and how that impacts my approach to Crossing Fonds. I'm going to share a few slides with you around our origins, but also around our contemporary programs, but they're going to be a bit random. But I was hoping it would make this a bit more interesting in case you get bored. VIVO Media Arts Center, formerly Video Inn, is a settler-founded and run access center operating on the stolen and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh since 1973. I come to this project from a different position from others on the panel. I'm not a trained archivist nor a technician, as you can tell, and I view my core work as stewardship. I benefit from the big brains of young archivists who inspire me every day. Many of you won't know VIVO, so I want to familiarize you with our founding, then I'll consider what in our history and future suggests alignment with Crossing Fonds. VIVO's archive is composed of media primarily, but not exclusively, analog videotape and digital files, documents, publications, technology, and ephemera generated out of the video and media art ecosystems of the past 50 years. We stirred archives and items generated across multiple artist-run centers, collectives, communities, aligned organizations, and individuals that are relevant to this region. The physical proximity of the fonds to each other informs our understanding of the intersections and reciprocal relationships. We house roughly 7,500 catalog video titles and have so far identified and cataloged items related to 4,500 producers, collectives, artist-run centers, and organizations, and steward 26 special collections. It's a weighty chronicle of video art and practice, most profoundly of the pre-digital era. So what in our history suggests alignment with Crossing Fonds? VIVO's culture of gathering and sharing originated with a 1971 mail art project by artist Michael Goldberg. He developed a global network of early adopters of the first portable video recorders, mailing hundreds of postcards, assembled postcard queries worldwide. He collected data on who, what, when, why, and assembled it in a series of video exchange directories. Essentially, the exchange functioned as an analog version of YouTube, with the post office substituting for an internet connection. He went on to be one of the founders of the Matrix Conference, which was aimed directly at that exchange network and drew 150 folks from North America, Europe, and Japan to Vancouver in 1973, where they shared video and considered the future of the medium. Two areas of interest were gaining public access to broadcast and to distribution. But those discussions that they had revealed a schism in the exchange. This is a quote from Lisa Steele at that conference. "I don't feel it's important for my tapes to be up on a list so that someone can check them off and take them, nor am I interested in a tape library. I'm not really sure why people are." I include this one because I think it's really important to consider what the context was at the time that the VIVO library was being formed. It seems ironic now because Lisa became the co-founder of Canada's largest and most successful video art distributor and has done incredible work around the archiving and collection and distribution of video art in the country. But the statement is important because it reflected the feelings of many whose art video practice was experimental, that was communally produced and process driven. And it came in response to Goldberg's suggestion that a video library be one outcome of the conference. Another delegate slammed Goldberg for what he called his retention compulsion. There was no assumption on the part of many that these experiments with video would or should be cataloged, shelved, and immortalized. Opinions diverged on making the ephemeral permanent, of institutionalizing the radical, and of the danger of monetizing an alternative art practice that many hoped would resist commercialization. The Video in Library, however, opened a few months later with 79 videos from that conference and grew through a kind of crowdsourcing through the video community that was small but international and eager for connection. Over the next 3 decades, VIVO did become a distributor, a production access center, and expanded its education and exhibition programs. And over time, its international reach diminished, but its local publics expanded and diversified. And eventually, in terms of media, analog was left behind, and the majority of our media collection now exists as born digital files. The archives are integral to every activity at our center. Copyright remains with the artists. We support artists' access to materials and act as agents when needed. We digitize the work of unfunded members and vulnerable allies at low cost or for free, with no expectation that they deposit with us. We facilitate artist remediation projects through research assistance, digitization, making personal connections, and often hosting an exhibition of the final project. We integrate the archive materials into our educational programs. For instance, Alicia Sirianni's mentorship to inspire two-spirit, queer, trans, and non-binary youth and their allies, using our Every Queer Thing finding aid developed by one of our archivists. They created personal responses to 50 years of queer art and activism. The project built on VIVO's history of making queer materials accessible to youth. VIVO has long relationships with the GLAM sector. However, collaborations with archives have been in our history relatively recent. In Vancouver, archivists from a range of institutions have met irregularly since the early 2010s, convening as the Audiovisual Heritage Association of BC. UBCI school grads have worked in our centers, and SFU, UBC, and the City of Vancouver have all been really generous partners. As institutional archives have responded to criticism around exclusion, their acquisitions have shifted and increasingly overlap with the type of collections that we hold. Despite differences in size, type, and budgets, we generally share the same goals. We are becoming less parallel and more skewed to these institutions, telling the same stories, but within different frames. So strengthening these relationships and dialogue is important and has been an invaluable asset in this project. As those who attended our event last night know, VIVO holds Sara's personal archive related to her activities in Vancouver. The VIVO funds complement Sara's, holding the bulk of her administrative and curatorial files that she produced during her decade or so as a core member of Video In's collective. I just want to say regarding our special collections, these have come almost exclusively from women whose practice has been outside of academia and centered on our activist or collective projects. For the growing number of video and media artists who've now received university education, and I say that because when Video In first started, that wasn't the case. Over the past 30 years, their preferred repositories now, however, are universities. So I think it appropriate that Sara, who has made significant contributions on both these fronts, chose to split her collection across multiple institutions, situating materials within the region, communities, and organizations in which they were originally created and referred. The splitting of fonds is not an uncommon occurrence, but it does present challenges for researchers. From the perspective of a small archive, the Crossing Fonds' potential is for community archives to be able to retain and manage their own collections in a way which is right for our constituencies and ethics while meeting researchers' needs. I just wanted to share 2 of 5 sketches that were done at an early Crossing Fonds workshop for the partner archives. we were asked to map our institution's relationships of accountability. I include this as I think of these differences often as I consider how to effectively partner across these institutions. VIVO does not have arm's length relationships with its creators. The fact can lead to a tangle of loyalties and responsibilities, which I think this chart infers. It was interesting to me that the three of us who created it are archivists who had barely been in the archive since COVID, a relatively new GM, and myself flew through this task with no disagreement. It also feels like we didn't know how to stop feeling responsible, whereas SFU's chart was really clear. So this illustrates to me the challenge of ARCs in contributing to Crossing Fonds. We are limited in our funding options, often minimally staffed and overambitious. If the platform is to be effective for community archives, then there needs to be consideration around the ease of transfer across platforms, which we're working on, but I think that's going to be really important. And an expectation that there is good enough metadata. The chart also hints at the depth of communities and the histories held here, and why sharing across institutions could bring new histories to researchers and community members. When I think of successful partnerships for this institution, VIVO, I think of Vancouver Independent Archives Week. The project was founded by 3 ARCs, Grunt Gallery, Western Front, and VIVO. We have decades of collaboration history. It featured our Archives Through Public Event series and expanded the dialogue on archival practice from the ARC perspective. That project set the groundwork for our most recent collaboration the Originating 3 undertook, a collaborative approach to fundraising and designing of a unique and discrete sites using the open source software Collective Access, which was considered at one point in the process of Crossing Fonds, but is more of a cataloging system and didn't have the capacities that we wanted for this project. An archive counter archive, which you're likely familiar, has led to much appreciated engagement with our collections, yet the imperatives of SSHRC, like its emphasis on outputs, stress our limited resources, especially staff. So it's been challenging to ensure meaningful connection between the artist run centers and specialized working groups. But there is great work being generated through ACA as well as Crossing Fonds. So as Crossing Fonds moves forward, it's clear that for it to engage meaningfully with small archives or community-based projects, it's a program that will need further adaptation. That's great. I love that.
Where's Karen?
Is it me? I'm over there. Okay.
GIS intervention.
I'll talk briefly. Sara mentioned our work we're doing currently with our Indigenous materials. We've been working for quite a period of time, actually. The archive holds both settler-produced materials about Indigenous peoples. It includes collaborations between Indigenous and settler producers, which were really common in the 70s and 80s, and it includes material created by Indigenous producers. And in the process of pulling together Collective Access, we had a Indigenous consultation and have recommendations have been brought forward from that. So we're currently working really deeply with provenance around the records. We want to be able to explain how every record arrived in the space, which is sometimes difficult to do since records arrived in really strange ways to VIVO, but luckily we still hold our archives and we're able to go back through the multiple correspondence and agreements and reach out to the producers who produced it as well. And that sort of work has been really valuable and important to what we're doing in the same way that Sophie Roberge created Every Queer Thing, going through the collection, pulling materials and creating a more in-depth database that expose the relationships between the different people who are working deeply with the record, like not just the video director, but who did they include in their thank yous? Who were the communities that they want to reach out to? So we're trying to bring that into our Collective Access program, and it's the type of thing that I think would be beneficial. That's the type of metadata that I find really beneficial and hope manages to be transferred to Crossing Fonds.
Karen?
I'm wrapping up. I believe strongly that before what a few archives, artists around centers still hold are further diminished and dispersed, we need to consider alternatives to depositing with larger institutions and upholding the records and their integrity in situ. In practice, so young and fragile, the more complete these relatively sparse archives remain, the more stories they will yield to researchers. Crossing Fonds has the potential to make it possible for small archives to realize their access goals while remaining rooted in community and retaining their autonomy if it can prioritize low barrier entry to the platform. It's also important to recognize that small archives often rely heavily on institutional memory. For VIVO, experiential and contextual knowledge of the collective's history is embodied in a handful of individuals and has enabled a largely uncatalogued collection to be navigated. Emily Guerrero, in the context of her time as archivist at VIVO, wrote, "As an archivist, your role is part wayfinder and part witch. The ideas, activities, timelines, professional and personal relationships that were critical to the trajectory of West Coast media and beyond are in those stacks, their connections, gossip, and gaps, awaiting robust metadata. At VIVO's imperfect, abundant, and definitely haunted archive, we definitely need more witches." But I just want to, in closing, thank all the witches in this project who have started to make this a really wonderful platform to be working with. Thanks very much.
Okay, and I can move forward like this. I do usually like to start by acknowledging my students, who I actually don't think are here with me today. But and thanks, Sara, for mentioning we had this long discussions at the beginning, even and during writing the grant, about the options, the technological options for trying to support Crossing Funds, like starting with what exists or designing from scratch. And I've always been a big in favor of designing from scratch, but I think actually the story of what's happened here is like really quite interesting. So designing from scratch does have problems in that it's a really long process, that it requires lots and lots of design thinking, but it also requires fundamental tech building and establishing, which is crazy expensive, and pretty much no grants that we can get right now give us enough to really design from scratch. But it is, and it does remain, that the radically different is really possible. And one of the things that, one of the things about this radically different being really possible is that the tech world has been developed really kind of in what we now call bro culture. And sometimes it's like really hard to try and adjust it into something that feels more comfortable. And there's been a tendency to think that one size fits all and that if they like it, we should love it. So sometimes it is important to think about what is radically different. This is just an example that some of you may know, but I think you might be interested in if you haven't heard of it yet. They call it the speculative Wonderverse. It's a design from scratch software for a hand-collected short science fiction stories that were created over the last century, and this guy collected them from little magazines and partial publications and bound them up together. And this is a digital interface into these collections. Also thought I would mention, usually I mention our effort of designing for serendipity, which actually is possible. You can incorporate the potential of serendipity in software, which is not done very often. But I thought you'd be interested and amused by this one, which is using biomimicry, and she wanted to do some radically different interaction. So she used how slime mold moves as the source of her inspiration. And you can find this on the NASA website. But let's see if it will actually run for us and you get to see it in action. Notice how she grabs parts of the interface and actually literally paints with the data. So here she's showing the different parts, but like here, if you're taking something that you might actually want to explore, I think she's gonna open up the protect from harm, and you can see it open up into the parts that it is. But one of the things that you can do as you open further up is you can take one of the sections and say, does it actually have any of the other parts? And take it and actually brush it across and see what other aspects it has. So it's kind of like painting with data. It's a whole different way of thinking about what you can do with data. But adjusting what exists, which is what we decided to do in Crossing Fonds, it's much more likely to get results, like that you could actually have something that you might really be able to use. Yeah, I mentioned this business about, trying to actually work with existing technology and, all of the assumption of one size fits all of the assumptions about a monolithic public that will all behave in the same way, which we all know we don't. And I also draw here from Brett Victor, who has been one of the most outspoken critiques, who does work within Apple, but about the different kinds of ways that you can try and be creative. So he divides it into use and draw, build, or construct, and code. And if you use, he talks about that as starting from some software that exists, starting from a template, and claims that though it may be quick, easy, scalable, and dynamic, that it's not expressive. And that's the one we want to kind of think about, right? If you draw, build, or construct, you end up with physical things or paintings or sculpture. And I don't know about easy, but we can all do it. Not so quick, not so scalable, not dynamic, but definitely expressive. And it's like the expression that we've used for centuries. Now, the problem with code is that it is scalable, dynamic, and expressive. And nobody who codes doesn't think of it as a creative act. But there's a learning barrier to becoming a coder. And these days, if you want to actually do something with code, you almost have to use some existing code because it's kind of like a deck of cards, right? If you really want to go right down to the bottom, you'll still be here in several decades. So anyway, okay. So yeah, in fact, so he's like really against this notion of using what exists. He says it's like taking a sentence, like if you're asking to write something, that you only get a few blanks to fill in, that all the basic structure of the sentence is there, right? Now, given that and his notion that we can't do this, Crossing Fonds, we're gonna try adjusting what exists, seeing if we can, and that's why the titles of this, I said, appropriate it, take it and make it different, make it ours, right? And so we started to just talk about what's possible, about pushing. One of the things that I actually noticed I've never seen a group take on the notion of personas so richly. And if you haven't gone and explored all of the personas and all of the details about these characters, but I do think, that this actually has helped, keep in mind as you're developing something that these type of people might use. And I particularly like the journeys where more than one type of persona will be trying to do something together and thinking about those journeys. And I do think that Crossing Fonds is kind of maybe breaking through in a different way, showing that maybe we can appropriate, that maybe, Sara also talked about how some of these people, and definitely her, have a much more deeper connection with long-term design thinking before what's happening currently, and that may have helped. But I think that there are, and it is showing new possibilities in adjusting and making existing software into our own for our own reasons. And actually along those kinds of lines, I mean, one of the things I sort of rant and rave about is like, in our world, we don't all wear uniforms, have the same hairstyles, drive the same cars, live in the same houses, and yet they tell us that we should all use the same technology. They tell us we should all love it, and actually we all hate it. I don't think I'm even, even people who are deep in that culture don't tend to like it. And so with a group of my friends who are also in this trying to like push the edge of what happens in technology, like technology, like, you know, the stuff you build a car from, it's not flexible. Once you've built it, that's what it is. But they still design all kinds of different cars for us. But they don't design all kinds of different technology. And technology is ultimately flexible. Why not? Right? So we like, we could be designing technology that would give us superpowers. Like a simple thing is you could have goggles that you could scan through your drawers and see where you'd left things. They can do it. That technology, I would actually know how to make that if I had the money to make something from scratch. But they don't do it for us. But we think that actually looking at our superhero comics is a nice inspiration for what one might really be able to do. And we made a whole set of different dimensions that are relevant if we are going to try and make some technology more empowering or less empowering. And that you can think about, you know, like, I mean, if you just pick about like something like, you know, second from the bottom, degree of control. If you don't have personal control, it's typically less empowering. And the more direct, interactive, and manipulative it is, it's typically more empowering. But these type of dimensions are not actually yet actively being used in designing software. And I think it's something that could be useful. I mean, I could go through all of them, but I think in the essence of time, we will move on at this point. Because we're going to have you know, in some ways the best for last. Kahani is going to actually show us what she has done. And yeah, that's my talk.
Thanks, Sheelagh. Fantastic.
So,
Thanks so much. So thank you, Dr. Sheelagh Carpendale, and now Kahani Ploessl.
Yes, so for my involvement in the project, I am the RA in the Crossing Fonds project, with my work centering on the building and development of our Crossing Fonds platform. So to conclude our introduction to the project, I will be covering the development of the platform through early conception, strategic implementations, and then doing a bit of a demo of the Omeka site. So first and foremost, I'd like to give a shout out to our partners. Crossing Fonds is a project about breaking barriers between archives. So this was a feat we could not have achieved without the collaboration of our partners in contributing both materials as well as sharing their perspectives and experiences on archival practices. As was demonstrated through Paul and Karen's presentations, we can really see the range of partners from academic institutions to community archives, and as such required a platform that could address the need to formalize a space where they could coexist. With that in mind, as the technological designer for the project, my goals for the platform can be summarized into these two goals. The first is to build an archive platform that pulls resources from multiple sources into a digitally enhanced environment, encouraging new research and community engagement. And then two, to create a replicatable tech stack that uses accessible open source tools. And open source tools essentially refers to code that is available online that is both accessible and free to use, and by that nature really encourage other developers to contribute their own knowledge and to kind of, you know, create something that is a lot more community driven. Our first step involved extensive brainstorming with the creation of personas, and this is work that our previous RA, Gabriel, really did a lot of work on to create these wonderful and detailed personas. Having created a total of 23 of them, I'm not going to go into the details of each, but you can find these on our website. But the main bits of takeaway here is that they cover a wide range of demographics, experience levels, and interests that in turn really informed what the user needs were for our project. In response to this, a list of potential widgets were cultivated and then researched by our team. Widgets here being used as a catch-all term for any open source widget that pertains to archival practices or has some adjacent functionality. Here they're organized by their central feature, with the highlighted ones representing the tools that we actively investigated, Omeka then becoming our primary tool. Our initial prototypes involved exploring JavaScript libraries, including D3, a data visualizing tool, Leaflet, a mapping tool, Annotorious, a annotation drawing function, as well as then Mirador with IIIF, a sandbox-style viewer. A JavaScript library is essentially a lightweight piece of code that you can kind of attach to any web space to add a single functionality. And so being so, it was a great source for continued ideation to really start prototyping ideas and then develop some more specific use cases. However, the downside of a lightweight JavaScript library solution is it does not provide any of the foundational framework you would really require when generating a database. So as soon as we have had our server set up, we set out to address just that with Omeka. So first, to just kind of give a brief introduction to what Omeka is. Omeka is a free open source software for developing platforms that create, manage, and display digital collections and exhibitions. It is a tool widely used by museums, libraries, educators, and scholars to create their online repositories. Additionally, Omeka provides two different versions of their platform. There is Omeka Classic and Omeka S, and Crossing Fonds uses Omeka S as this version is particularly well suited for repositories all coming into one space and hosting multiple different sites. Furthermore, Omeka is extremely customizable through the use of modules, being an open source tool that encourages other developers to add their own functions. Plugging in different modules really allows Omeka to be tailored to your specific needs. So having conducted all this research into user needs, as we stepped into the development stage of our platform, we can describe our areas of interest through these three categories of development. First, access to fonts pertains to developing a space on the item level. This was really about addressing the range of materials and where they're coming from and all the different metadata they require, much of which is really custom to our case studies and the research that has been conducted there. So step one of the project really involved developing what strategies we could employ to make that easier on our team, as well as introduce item level interactions that the public can start to play around with. Most recently, we have entered the visualizations phase of the project, and this is about zooming out from the item level to create collective readings on the collections as a whole. So what we have here is more of a work in progress, but we do have a few visualizations up on the website for you guys to see what kind of internal relationships we have with our materials. And then lastly, output is all about the next steps for Crossing Fonds, this stage considering the final output of Omeka and how various generated visuals or new research, new media creation can be used and brought elsewhere. So to answer these derived design goals and best strategize development on the platform, I created this distribution of the available modules in the latest version of Omeka 4.0, as a means to really strategize our development. So this is a very top level view that then kind of categorizes the modules into two tiers of specific function. And usually when you are looking at some developed Omeka platform or build, it will involve a even distribution of modules throughout this table, but only about 1 or 2 in each subgrouping because those kind of tend to overlap. So each Omeka build will kind of be its own unique configuration of these. And speaking of filtering things down, this is a particular configuration that we use for our Crossing Fonds platform. And then the highlighted modules at the end are the ones that I will kind of be given a bit of a specific mention when demoing the platform, which is next. I know we're dipping into our break time, so I'll keep this more on the brief side, but just giving you guys a glimpse into what the platform is and how to approach it.
Don't worry about, it's okay.
Oh,
Do your
okay.
Presentation, yeah.
So to first kind of sidebar for a moment, we do ask that people create a guest account under the login log out page in the navigation menu. I don't think if I click it now, since I'm already logged in, it won't show you, but essentially it'll just be a place for you to put in your email, a display name, and then a password, and then you will receive an email just to give to verify that and activate it. And we ask that you do this so that you can interact fully with the modules that are included on the website, as well as then for our own internal research. It is really helpful to see how people are using the different modules. So as for the site itself, you can browse our entire collection in the Browse All tab, or you can look at things how we have organized it in our team in the case studies. I think, in the way, there you go. So yeah, we can break down into our individual case studies and the collections within those as well. On our case study page, we also have a really nice timeline visualization that takes the date of all of our items and puts them into this really fun timeline. And it's, for myself, I think this is really fun, just seeing how dense options we have, especially in particular time periods. So this is a really fun module to go through. But when looking at an individual item, we can then really see all of the metadata that attaches them. And here we are. Let's do this one. You just saw it. So when you enter an item page, you can see the media open in this media viewer. That will take just a second to populate. And some items also have multiple media attached to it that you can move throughout. All of the metadata is then over here on the right. And if you hover over a metadata title, you can then get a little bit more information about what that metadata field is aiming to describe. You can also then add this item to your personal selection so that you can begin to group items as you like. And I'll show that in a moment, but that is a page up at the top of our navigation bar. You also then have the option to contribute metadata. When you do this, you will have access to a few controlled vocabularies that are pulling from external vocabularies that have a numerous amount of options. And when you're in here, you would click add linked data. You would then type in something. I like to use cats as my example, and this will auto-populate with all of the vocabulary suggestions from this particular vocabulary that you can then attach to our item and then just click submit. And pending admin approval, we will get these up and they will show up along with the original item in its own contributed metadata section. There's also an interpretive analysis section down here where if you want to get a little bit more personal and share your own observations, you can type up something and then click submit, and that will automatically, doesn't need any admin approval, will show up under the item. And then you can kind of like respond to other people's interpretive analysis. So this is a great place to have item level dialogues. Okay, scrolling all the way back up. So as for the curation, you'll be able to see that in this menu here, and you can create specific subgroupings as well to then kind of move your items between things and get really personal with it and just start to pull from all the different case studies what is personally interesting to you. On to then our data visualizations. We have them up on this page, and these are really exciting initial looks at how the relationships in our collection can be seen. And these specifically involve items that have a metadata field that are pointing to another item. So the data type of that field is another item in the database, and that's how we can have these really great relationships. And you can click through them, open up a pop-up that's describing the relationships. With this one, you can even kind of unfold it, which is really fun. And then you can also click through this one to help zone in on a specific connection. And then our last module has to do with adding items yourself. So this is kind of mimicking what we have going on in the back end, but this is a front end interpretation of that, where you have access to the same metadata that we use, either our minimal metadata set or the full metadata set we use when dealing with archival items. Just be sure that when you do submit an item here that you are okay with it being put up on our public site. We're assuming that you are okay with that. So then once those are there, they will show in the other collected items page. And then lastly, throughout the symposium, we will be asking that you take a look at our Omeka survey. This will point to a separate space where then you can post your thoughts on what you think of the platform and what maybe we should look at doing for our next step. So,
yeah. Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I realize that we're a little bit delinquent, but we started a little bit late, and I will wrap us at 10:30, but just wondering if there's any questions from those who are in the room or comments. And also Sydney will be looking in the online world to see if there's any questions or comments there.
Thank you very much. Fantastic presentations. My question is about how, and I may have missed it, you may have mentioned it, but how the participating institutions and archival organizations would contribute to the platform. Like how are their collections being sort of fed into? What kind of access is it? Like, would you have a window into all of what is at the City of Vancouver archives, or is it only specific records being made available?
So I'm going to give this to Kahani and then Paul, and I have a comment too. So Kahani, over to you. Because this is, we're going to answer from what we currently have done, but also what's possible.
Yeah, so when we are getting all these other archives into our space, there are methods to kind of just like grabbing an entire repository from some place called OAI PMH that we didn't actually end up doing for our particular platform because it just required some setup that we weren't able to get to. But what we did is we are pulling materials, like selected materials from the source archives, and then bringing those into the platform. And one method for doing that a little bit faster is through like a CSV export and then re-import to just kind of have metadata auto map across the platform. So you kind of have to do that manual walkabout, and we don't have access to the entire collections there.
Yeah, thank you. And one of our colleagues, Sara, who has been very involved, has experimented and actually used that approach for some of the Omeka S sites that they've built. So it really is something we'd like to do in the future because it would give users much more flexibility. I mean, clearly the archives has to approve the uploading of, and we're not talking about a full archive, but we'd be talking about a particular font. And that would really shift the balance here because it becomes a flexible, self-driven platform. The archivist can attest to, and Kahani, the intricate amount of work that was put into, uploading item by item. But there were some batch uploads. I don't know if you want to add to that, Paul or Karen.
Just that at this point, it was sort of what was selected and uploaded to the platform was really driven by the researchers and what they wanted to display. And it was also time limited. So Sara has a very large and rich font, and I think you sampled from it. More time, maybe we could have actually uploaded your entire font. So that, but it also goes back to a discussion of like kind of data modeling and, you know, I think we focused at this point on researchers saying, I'm studying a topic. I'm going to go to different repositories. I'm going to select records that I think help me tell my story, and I will curate that. So we're not seeing font, we're seeing bits of font, right? Is another use case in archive just saying we're putting an entire font online and pushing it out and letting you select.
I don't, no, that's good. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Yep, coming your way. And then we're gonna, oh, you have one online? Okay, we're gonna take this question though. Okay.
Thank you very much for all your presentations. I am amazed by the complexity and possibilities that this is providing. I'm wondering, Paul mentioned that he's interested at the beginning of the project, he was interested to learn about the needs of digital humanists as one type of customers that you serve. I'm wondering, those who identify as digital humanists in this project, what have you learned about the archivist labor? And I'm touched that this project is one of very few digital humanities projects that actually acknowledges archivist labor. So thank you so much. But how has your perception of archives, archival work, archival spaces changed during these 2 years, and whether it changed? And to Paul, building on the previous question, what are your thoughts about the risks and challenges and possibilities of this decontextualization of records that are pulled from your repository and other archival repositories? And I'm a big fan of reusing, recycling, and all this stuff. And I see the possibilities. I can see visualizations and these patterns and networks growing. But what are the risks and benefits, and how you see this developing in the future? Thank you.
I think the first, here, I'm going to give this to you, and I have my own mic. That first question, I hope we can address over the next few days, because I think it's going to come up through quite a few of the presentations tomorrow as well. I want you to ask Andrea Fatona about it a little bit, because she comes she's really coming at database creation and archival practice from a curatorial practitioner perspective, and I think it'll be really interesting to hear what she has to say about it. For me, I'm not an archivist, but I've spent so much of my career as an artist and as a historian in archives that I already have that kind of empathy with the archivist. But still, for me, just the level of labor of identifying objects and the metadata and the kind of care of rethinking how things are described and the kind of protectiveness, which I think, I mean, that's the nature of collections and archives anyhow. Like, I also have a sort of a museum studies background, which is a great thing, but a terrible thing, right? So I've watched the archivists sort of struggle, around those questions of what has to stay and what can be redescribed. And I've also watched the archivists be very protective in a good way of communities, and, how much you want to open the discussion about a culture of care. So from where I was as a baby archival researcher 4 decades ago, dealing with archives that were quite rigid and not very excited about the fact I was a feminist labor historian, actually labor activist coming in, to the very same archives now who are our partners, who are so open to change. So, but I think we have to write a paper on this together. So. And then maybe just 30 seconds on the second question, Paul.
I think one of the exercises we undertook was to look at minimal metadata sets. And one of the things the archivist wanted to see was a link back, each object link back to a finding aid to put it into context. So yes, researchers are making selections and maybe decontextualizing, but I think that's what researchers always do, and this is in a digital form as opposed to an analog form. So I don't feel threatened by that, especially if the objects are linked back to a source finding aid where the totality of the context or the archival context can be found.
Yeah. And do look at the finding aid that Karen and I created with a lot of help from the archival team, because it shows you it was a very labor intensive on the part of the archivists, but also the researchers. So it's a sense of that kind of collaboration. Okay, thank you everybody on our panel.